It began on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon, the sun slanting through our living room blinds in lazy stripes, when she dropped the words as casually as one might fold a napkin. "Don't come to my sister's wedding." She flipped through a glossy dress catalog, her voice flat, as if discussing the latest shade of lipstick rather than issuing a decree that shattered half a decade of shared promises. I felt the catalog tremble in her hand, though she didn't flinch or even glance my way. "James's in-laws don't like you," she added, as though it were an afterthought, a footnote to some larger household chore, and not the verdict condemning me to the status of unwelcome stranger. I stared at the pages in her lap, an endless parade of sequins and chiffon, but my mind was deaf to their allure. I heard only the finality in her tone, the weight of those 7 words pressing down on me like a tombstone. After everything I'd done, co-signing the lease for her parents' restaurant, wiring seed money into her brother's fledgling startup, staying up through nights of bloodshot worry and caffeine-fueled code to build the online platform they depended on, I suddenly wasn't good enough. No argument formed in my throat. No pleading rose to my lips. I had no retort that could pierce the thin veneer of her casual cruelty. So I simply smiled, that quiet, practiced smile that concealed more hurt than any shout. Then I rose and left the room. The click of the living room door a measured punctuation to the end of an unspoken chapter in our life together. Outside, the lawn glowed emerald beneath a sky that seemed oblivious to the storm inside me. I walked to my study without a glance back, the soft thud of my footsteps echoing the drum of my heartbeat. Once inside, I shut the door and sank into my chair, a familiar cocoon of leather and worn armrests. I set my coffee aside and opened my laptop, the glow of the screen illuminating a world I alone controlled. Their entire business infrastructure, every point-of-sale terminal in the bakery chain, every data pipeline in the boutique fitness app, every workflow in the real estate CRM rested on software I held the rights to. I had built their backend from scratch, piece by piece, line by line, never asking for titles or accolades, only for the quiet assurance that the code would run. And run it did, powering their operations and filling their accounts with the profits they now gladly pocketed. I brought the window into focus, fingers tracing the tab where their system dashboard lay untouched. The indicators glowed green, humming with the confidence of a machine that believed itself invincible. But I knew better. One click, and the fulcrum would shift. One click, and the empire they had grown complacent upon would collapse. I leaned forward and paused, heart thrumming, as if testing the stillness before a storm broke. I remembered nights spent bent over a keyboard, deciphering cryptic API calls, forging seamless integrations, refactoring long-neglected code to enhance security, all so they could expand without a second thought. I remembered the pride in her eyes the day I handed over that first alpha build, the way she'd kissed my cheek and whispered, "You're amazing." But this was no time for nostalgia. This was the reckoning. With a steady breath, I moved the cursor, hovered over the Revoke Access button, and clicked. Instantly, the indicators flickered red. Behind me, the hum of my coffee maker seemed to falter, leaving me in a charged silence that buzzed louder than any server rack. My phone buzzed, an incoming message from her mother. "Why is our POS system down?" Followed by another from her brother. "We can't process orders. Please help." I didn't reply. I didn't need to. The logs would trace back the authorization revocation to my account ID. I simply powered down the laptop and leaned back, letting the aftermath settle around me. In that moment, the man who worked in tech at family gatherings was gone. In his place sat someone who had built the very foundation they stood upon and chose, at long last, to show them the cost of erasure. I closed my eyes and let the distant echo of alarms and urgent phone calls fill the room. They had asked me to stay away. They had made me forgettable. Now they would remember. And when their business lay in ruins, they would see that the man they excluded had held all the keys. And I, quiet, unassuming, always behind the scenes, would watch them scramble, knowing that sometimes the most devastating power lies in a simple click. They always thought I was just the quiet guy at family dinners. The plus one who offered to do the dishes, who nodded politely through conversations about catering themes and honeymoon destinations. They knew I worked in tech, but not once did anyone ever ask, "What exactly do you do?" It wasn't curiosity that drove their smiles, it was condescension, thinly veiled behind champagne flutes and passive-aggressive remarks about how the real money was in real estate or retail. Let them believe what they wanted. The truth was far less humble than I allowed them to assume. I built systems, infrastructure, invisible highways of data and automation that made their shiny storefronts function, their customer experience seamless, their profits soar. I didn't sell cookies. I optimized the platform that tracked inventory, predicted demand by zip code, and automatically reordered ingredients to minimize waste. I didn't sell apartments. I designed the CRM tool that pinged agents with buyer behavior metrics and visualized regional analytics in real-time dashboards. I didn't run fitness studios, but my code tracked user churn, fed behavioral data into retention algorithms, and fired off targeted promotions that kept their clients renewing every month like clockwork. They never saw that, though. They saw someone who didn't wear a suit to dinner, someone who didn't brag, someone who stayed quiet when they passed around contracts like playing cards at poker night. But I saw everything. I saw the day James's father-in-law, Callum Weston, pitched a multi-channel bakery model like it was some revolutionary business. I smiled and nodded, all the while drafting the back-end pipeline in my head. I knew how to turn his wishful thinking into a scalable solution. So I did. I built the database structure, the API endpoints, the payment gateways. When they wanted in-store kiosks, I integrated them. When they expanded to 6 cities, my system adapted, no sweat. When they bragged about low error rates and fast settlements, they toasted their operations team. No one ever toasted me, because I had never asked them to. When James started dating Callum's daughter, I helped them write a funding pitch to Silver Granite Holdings, a family-run venture capital firm. I stayed up late rewriting slide decks, making sure every claim was backed by live analytics pulled from the system I created. They got the money. I got a half-hearted, "You're a lifesaver, bro." Then came the second project, an app for boutique fitness. They wanted video libraries, user memberships, live class scheduling, embedded payments. Again, I built it. Not with templates or third-party crutches, but with custom tools. Real infrastructure that could handle 10,000 concurrent users without breaking a sweat. The app launched, gained traction. Callum mentioned me in one email thread. 1. I didn't build for applause. I built for control. Early on, when the deals were still handshakes and promises, I had insisted on developer ownership clauses. Quiet lines buried in early contracts that no one bothered to read because they trusted me. I wasn't trying to screw them. I just knew how people operated. I knew that when money starts flowing and the lights get brighter, people forget who lit the fuse. So I kept the fuse in my pocket. They never bought me out, never negotiated a transfer of control. They just assumed that because I never made noise, I had no teeth. Today, they found out I had fangs. I sat in my office, laptop open, the server dashboard blinking like a cockpit. Silver Granite's bakery PS network had collapsed first. Their front-end terminals couldn't process sales. Next came the CRM outage, real estate agents locked out of client data, calendars wiped clean. The fitness app went next, users thrown out of sessions midstream, payment APIs unresponsive. Internal logs all pointed to one cause: revoked backend authorization. At first glance, it might have looked like a cyber attack, but it wasn't. There was no hacking, no breach, just me. Legally, quietly, I pulled my hand away. The same hand that had built the skeleton they danced on. It didn't even take long. I'd written the system with modular detachment in mind. Pulling out my access was like removing a keystone brick. No alarms, no fireworks, just sudden, systemic failure. 15 minutes. For companies. Paralyzed. My phone began buzzing calls, emails, texts. James, Callum, their operations manager, their lawyer, their CTO. I ignored them all. I watched as panic set in, messages with subject lines in all caps, red flagged with urgent or emergency. I sipped my coffee and leaned back in my chair. They'd never seen me like this. Never imagined that the man in the corner, who cleared their plates and kept to himself, could snap the spine of their enterprise with the tap of a key. But here's the thing about being underestimated: it's freedom. It lets you observe without scrutiny. It lets you build without interference. And it lets you walk away with the blueprint while everyone else is admiring the wallpaper. I wasn't angry. Not really. That moment with my wife, when she told me not to come to the wedding, when she said I wasn't welcome because James's in-laws didn't like me, that wasn't what hurt. What hurt was how quickly she accepted it. How easily she rolled those words off her tongue, like I was a stain they had all finally agreed to scrub out. Forgettable. That's what they called me. And now, as their operations team scrambled, I made myself unforgettable. No drama, no threats, just a silence that screamed. I opened the command log again, reviewed the audit trail. Every action timestamped. Every revocation signed with my ID. Nothing covert, nothing malicious. Just retraction. My rights. My code. They had asked me to stay away from their celebration. They had drawn a circle and placed me outside of it. That was fine. They could have their little party without me. But I'd built the lights, the stage, the sound system. And now, all of it had gone dark. They thought I was the background, a tool. They forgot I was the architect. And this was me simply flipping the switch. Dinner was quiet that night. The kind of quiet that fills the space between people who used to know each other. My wife hummed to herself as she moved around the kitchen, setting down plates with a brightness I couldn't match. She looked radiant in a way that didn't feel natural to me anymore, like she was performing joy rather than living in it. She twirled once, showing off the soft gold shimmer of her new bridesmaid dress as she passed by the table, holding a glass of wine in one hand and her phone in the other. "They're really happy you won't be there," she said, not even looking at me. Her voice was breezy, unbothered, a script she'd rehearsed. I sat still, fork untouched on the plate. "They think you're forgettable," she added, like she was telling me the weather. Not cruel, just cold. Like she'd already come to terms with the thought. Like she believed it, too. Forgettable. It sat in my stomach like rusted iron. Heavy. Familiar. I nodded slowly and took a sip of water, not because I was thirsty, but because it gave me something to do. Something to fill the space between her words and my thoughts. My eyes wandered to the family photos lining the sideboard. Christmas 2 years ago, her parents smiling in front of the tree I helped carry in the rain. Her brother James grinning next to me with a bottle of champagne, the same one I gifted him after helping him secure that small business grant. There was a frame of her mother cutting the ribbon at the opening of the first bakery location, a ribbon I had paid for. The catering van they used was mine for 3 months because their financing fell through. But of course, forgettable. Funny. I remembered when James's father-in-law called me out of the blue, asking if I could chat with their new CFO, desperate to make sure the back-end app could handle their Q3 targets. I spent 2 weekends rebuilding their architecture without charging them a cent. They never even updated the credits. I remembered when his mother-in-law messaged me on LinkedIn at 2:13 a.m. because she couldn't figure out how to set up her password recovery protocol. I walked her through it. She sent a thank you emoji. That was the last I heard. They forgot me? No, they erased me. They sanded down the parts of the story that didn't flatter them and repainted the canvas without me in it. Not out of malice, but out of convenience. I was useful until I wasn't. Valuable until I no longer added shine to the picture they wanted to present to their peers, their investors, their carefully curated social circles. What stung wasn't that they said I was forgettable. What stung was how easily my wife echoed it. I wondered if she ever truly saw me, or just saw the advantages I provided. The seamless way I absorbed her problems, solved them, and never asked for applause. The way I sat silently through her family's barbed jokes and her brother's subtle jabs. How I always carried the weight so she could float above it. Now they'd cut the cord. Now I was weightless. But they'd made one mistake. They forgot that the man they deemed forgettable also remembered everything. Every line of code I'd written. Every license agreement they skimmed over. Every clause they signed with barely a glance. Every midnight call I answered. Every connection I leveraged for their gain. And memory, in the right hands, is power. She kept talking, rattling on about color themes and the seating chart, and how James's wife-to-be wanted an ice sculpture, but wasn't sure if it was too extra. I listened. Or pretended to. It was easier than interrupting. Easier than explaining that every word out of her mouth only tightened the noose they'd hung themselves with. She poured herself another glass and sat down across from me. "I know this is weird," she said finally. "I was trying to meet mine, but I didn't want it to be a scene. You know how they are. They just think it's better this way. This way. Like cutting me out was just good project management." I nodded. "No scene," I said. My voice was calm. Too calm. She mistook that for understanding. "Thank you," she said, touching my hand briefly before turning back to her plate. What she didn't know, what none of them knew, was that I had already begun preparing the scene. Quietly. Precisely. I'd spent the past year updating the structure of their enterprise software. Nothing major. Just foundational changes, control nodes, new encryption layers, restructured hosting rights. All perfectly legal, all outlined in update documentation they signed without reading. No malice, no sabotage, just insurance. Because somewhere deep down, I'd known this moment was coming. I'd seen the way they looked at me, like I was the dusty support beam in a polished showroom. Necessary, but not part of the aesthetic. They didn't hate me. They just didn't see me. Not really. And you can't be loyal to someone you don't see. I cleared my plate and washed it by hand. She was on the phone now, talking to her sister, laughing about flower arrangements. I stood in the kitchen, water running over ceramic and fingers, letting the sound drown out her voice. I didn't say anything else that night. Didn't bring it up. I just walked back to my study after she went to bed and opened my terminal. The login beeped once, accepting my fingerprint. Lines of code blinked on the screen like waiting soldiers. They thought I was forgettable. Tomorrow, they'd remember me very, very clearly. The next morning, my inbox lit up before the sun had fully risen. I hadn't even poured my coffee when the first string of panic-laced subject lines began pouring in like a digital avalanche. The top one read, "Urgent. PS failure. Can't process orders." Under it, "Critical error. Back-end authorization revoked." Then another, "Emergency. Payroll system down. Please advise." I leaned back in my chair, still in my robe, the smell of Colombian roast rising from the mug beside me. I didn't move. Not yet. I just watched the flood of desperation unfold, line after line, company after company, all pointing to one unmistakable source: me. Silver Granite's digital infrastructure was on fire, and only I knew where the extinguishers were. The bakery chain couldn't accept payments, their terminals frozen mid-transaction with customers growing irate and confused. Callum's boutique fitness app, once praised for its seamless scheduling and live session reliability, had gone completely dark. No login capabilities, no saved workouts, nothing but a blank screen and a spinning wheel of death. The real estate CRM had locked out every broker and agent, client histories gone, active listings inaccessible, calendars wiped clean. Total blackout. The logs told a story that only the right eyes could read. They all traced back to a single trigger. Account owner lockdown. A clean, efficient kill switch I'd coded in during version 2.1 of their unified backend. A safety valve, or a final exit. My coffee tasted richer that morning. You see, I hadn't stolen a thing. I hadn't broken a system, breached a firewall, or written a single malicious line of code. All I had done was stop giving. And that, legally, was well within my rights. Years ago, when I'd quietly helped them scale their businesses, I made sure to retain system ownership. Not because I didn't trust them, but because I did. I trusted that one day, they'd forget. And they did. When they asked me to step back, to not show my face at a wedding I helped finance through favors, hours, and unspoken sacrifice, I didn't raise my voice. I didn't fight. I just remembered. I remembered that I'd written the first line of code in the Silver Granite infrastructure, that the cloud-based authorization layer was mine, that they never paid for a buyout, that the licenses were assigned to a holding account, mine, hidden in plain sight because they never bothered to ask. So yesterday, when I hit that button, I wasn't taking revenge. I was reclaiming what was mine. The beauty of it all? The system didn't just crash. It choked, methodically, elegantly. Analytics froze mid-pull. Scheduled reports failed. Webhooks hung, unresponsive. Internal transfers stalled. Bank confirmations bouncing back like rubber checks. Their operations team must have thought it was a DDoS attack, or maybe a database corruption. But the audit trail? Crystal clear. It was me, and it was clean. My phone rang, vibrating against the edge of the desk. I glanced at the screen. James. I let it ring out. Then Callum. Then the bakery manager. They didn't know yet. Not really. All they knew was the system was failing. They hadn't seen the why. That would come soon enough. I clicked into the analytics console out of curiosity, watching the server metrics dip and spike like a patient coding in a hospital bed. The diagnostics panel blinked a soft red. All the active user sessions had dropped off within minutes. Transactions declined. Internal support tickets piling up. I imagined Callum pacing a conference room, barking questions at a junior IT guy who had no idea where the source code even lived, let alone how to fix it. I imagined James's wife trying to reset passwords while their head of product swore they had backed up the infrastructure last quarter. Backup wouldn't help them now, because the system still existed. It wasn't deleted or lost. It was just inaccessible. Because I said so. The strange thing? I didn't feel victorious. Not exactly. I felt clear. For the first time in months, maybe even years. Like someone had wiped a smudge off a mirror and I was finally seeing myself again. Not the ghost at the edge of their tables. Not the silent problem solver. But the architect. The man they chose to forget until they needed him. And now, needing me was no longer an option. I opened my personal server, the one I used to monitor my new project, Carver Analytics. The graphs were healthy, usage rising, data flowing. It was a leaner, cleaner system. One built not to please others, but to serve my vision. Transparent. Secure. Mine from top to bottom. I closed the console and turned back to the silver granite logs, watching them spin like a car stuck in the mud. By noon, their internal Slack was a disaster. I knew because one of their admins had foolishly invited me as a workspace developer months ago, and no one had ever revoked my permissions. Messages flew. Anyone figure out what's going on? All dashboards are offline. Payroll deadlines today. Someone called James. Or Callum. This is catastrophic. Did someone sabotage us? I could have answered, but I didn't. Instead, I screenshotted a few of the more panicked threads and saved them in a folder titled Validation. Not because I plan to use them, but because sometimes it helps to remember that silence doesn't mean weakness. Silence means waiting. The difference now? I wasn't waiting for them to see me. I had already turned away. I closed my laptop slowly, letting the click of the hinge be the final period on a chapter they never saw me writing. A chapter where the quiet man in the corner wasn't background noise, but the man who built the sound system, the stage, and the lights. And now, all of it had gone dark. By my hand. By my right. And I hadn't even raised my voice. It didn't take long. Less than 24 hours after the first system failures, I saw Callum Weston's name flash on my phone screen. Once. Then twice. Then again. I let it ring. Each time his name appeared, the silence that followed felt louder. He didn't leave a voicemail. He didn't have to. I knew exactly what he wanted. When the calls went unanswered, he pivoted to texts. Urgent, we need to speak. Then another. We were told you were the original developer. Please, this is affecting payroll and operations. I stared at the words, still in bed, sunlight barely creeping through the blinds. My wife had already left, early brunch with her sister to finalize things. Things like guest lists, seating arrangements. Anything but the fact that the wedding her family had exiled me from was now unraveling thread by thread. They had thought I was ornamental, disposable, the guy you nod at during dinner and forget exists the second he leaves the room. Now they couldn't afford to ignore me. When the email came, I opened it slowly. It was dressed in urgency, but trimmed in courtesy. Dear, my name, we understand there may have been an issue with back-end access on systems developed under your management. We would greatly appreciate the opportunity to meet and discuss a solution. Please let us know a convenient time. Signed formally, with a plea hiding behind professionalism. It was the first time they'd ever used appreciate and opportunity in the same sentence addressed to me. I replied with a single link, a calendar invite. Meeting location, virtual only time, 11:30 a.m. sharp. Duration, 30 minutes. Attendees, Callum Weston. James. Their tech director, Kyle. No pleasantries. No explanation. Just a digital door they could choose to walk through. One they had never realized I held the key to. I didn't plan to say much. I didn't need to. I had facts, contracts, and control. What I wanted wasn't chaos. It wasn't vengeance. It was clarity. A reminder. A mirror held up to the faces that had smiled at me for years without ever truly seeing me. At 11:28 a.m., I logged in and checked the camera framing. Clean shirt. Neutral background. My company logo, Carver Analytics, visible on the bookshelf behind me. I adjusted the angle slightly, took a sip of water, and waited. At 11:30 sharp, they entered the room. Callum looked as I expected, strained, trying too hard to appear composed. James sat beside him, jaw tight, eyes bloodshot. Kyle, the tech director, looked like he hadn't slept. He was flipping through screens on a second monitor, typing rapidly even as the call connected. Thank you for joining us, Callum began, his voice tight but civil. Well, we're facing a major disruption to all three systems we operate, and after speaking with a few contractors, it became clear that the root permissions trace back to you. I didn't nod. I didn't blink. Yes, I said simply. James leaned in. Is this a mistake? A glitch? I mean, it has to be something we overlooked. We're not accusing you, you're not. I asked, my voice flat. Then what is this call? Callum's face twitched. Look, we had no idea you had that level of access. No, you didn't, I said. And that's not an accident. That's negligence. Kyle jumped in. We were never told you retained admin rights. We assumed the platform was handed over after initial deployment. I smiled at that. Assumptions. Dangerous things. I clicked the share screen button. A PDF opened. Page after page of contracts, licenses, signatures. All of them with one consistent clause buried halfway down. Master system control remains the sole right of the developer until bought out or reassigned. All three of their signatures were there. He signed. Dated. Verified. Callum's eyes flicked to the document like it was a foreign language. These were early agreements. Provisional. No, I said, scrolling slowly. These are final. There was no amendment. No reassignment. No buyout. The rights are still mine. James looked like he wanted to argue, but Kyle was already shaking his head. He's right, Kyle muttered. This clause was never updated. It's still in force. The silence that followed was delicious. I let them sit in it. You welcomed me when I was useful, I said, voice even. You invited me to meetings, sent me data requests, cashed in favors. But the moment I wasn't needed for something, you didn't just forget me. You erased me. You disinvited me from a wedding I helped pay for. Your daughter told me I wasn't welcome. Callum tried to soften his tone. This isn't personal, but your money is, I cut in. Your growth is. Your reputation is. I stopped sharing the screen and leaned forward. So let me ask you something. If I'm forgettable, how come your entire enterprise stopped working the moment I stepped away? They didn't answer. They couldn't. I'm not here to destroy what you've built, I said, more for myself than for them. I'm not deleting data. I'm not corrupting anything. I'm simply reclaiming access to the tools I made. Tools you've built empires on without ever acknowledging who laid the first brick. James opened his mouth, then closed it. Kyle just nodded, eyes still flicking across his screen. So, I continued, this meeting is for your benefit, not mine. You want your systems back? We talk buyout, market rate, licensing, consulting, whatever it takes to build a clean separation. But I'm not doing charity work anymore. Callum's face tightened, but he didn't argue, and that was the difference. Now, I wasn't the guy they could lean on for a favor. I was the guy they had to deal with on my terms, or not at all. 30 minutes passed. I ended the call exactly on time. No raised voices. No chaos. Just a screen. A contract. And the weight of everything they'd underestimated. They had forgotten who I was. I had just reminded them. At exactly 11:30 a.m., I joined the Zoom meeting again. Different link. Different tone. This one wasn't framed as an urgent discussion or technical consultation. This was damage control, and they knew it. Callum Weston, his son-in-law James, and Kyle, their tech director, were all there when I logged in. The camera caught them mid-conversation, faces tight, voices hushed, and clipped like men trying to stitch a wound closed without anesthesia. Look, we had no idea you had that level of access. Callum said the moment the timer ticked 1 second past the hour. No greeting. No welcome. Just urgency. I didn't smile. I didn't nod. I waited. He continued, trying to keep his voice calm. You built amazing systems. We all agree on that. But we didn't realize you maintained this much control. That's not true, I said, my tone flat. You didn't realize you left the control with me. You knew I built it. You knew I structured the database, linked the API keys, wrote the encryption protocols. What you didn't do was read the fine print. James leaned forward. That wasn't personal. I laughed once, sharp and humorless. But your money is. Your influence is. Your selective memory definitely is. There was a beat of silence. No one interrupted. So I clicked share screen. It was time. I pulled up the PDF folder I had prepared, the digital receipts they thought were long buried in some early-stage inbox. On the screen, page after page of licensing agreements, development contracts, and signed e-documents materialized. Each one cleanly annotated, color-coded, and time-stamped. Let's walk through a few things, I said. Slide 1. Silver Granite Holdings. Dev Contract Alpha Phase. Callum's signature glared from the bottom of the page, right next to the clause I'd highlighted in yellow. All system ownership, control keys. and backend access shall remain the sole property of the original developer unless expressly reassigned or compensated via a separate buyout. Slide 2. Phase 2 CRM expansion, fitness app integration. Again, there was James's digital signature, careless and quick. The clause was even more direct. Developer retains exclusive override access unless formally negotiated in writing. Slide 3. Real estate platform backend SLA. Kyle's initials were there, approving a monthly update cycle I'd proposed. Beneath it, override keys assigned to developer account. System shell dependent on developer access tokens. I turned off screen sharing. Let the weight of it settle into the silence. You didn't read, I said. You trusted me to build what you needed, and I did. You just never thought to respect the builder once the scaffolding came down. Kyle cleared his throat, trying to hold on to the technical thread. We thought those clauses were temporary, that the moment we launched, control would shift to internal teams. And you never asked, I replied. Never checked. You were too busy celebrating your growth. James sighed, rubbing the bridge of his nose. Look, we know now. We get it. You have every right. But the timing, man, it's brutal. We've got investors calling. Customers demanding refunds. We're hemorrhaging trust. Trust, I repeated, tasting the word like something foreign. You want to talk about trust? Callum cut in. Let's not make this emotional. I didn't raise my voice, but I leaned closer to the camera. Let's, just for a minute. They stopped talking. You disinvited me from a wedding I helped finance. After I lifted your son-in-law's startup off the ground. After I spent nights building the digital core of your companies. I wasn't just forgotten. I was dismissed. Like a temporary intern whose pass expired. James shifted uncomfortably, but he didn't speak. You didn't see me, but I saw you, I said. Every time you took credit for metrics you didn't understand. Every time you hosted a media interview and failed to mention the platform, the system, the framework that made any of this possible. Kyle muttered something under his breath, maybe a weak apology, maybe a curse. It didn't matter. I continued, calm, methodical. You got used to the machine running. You stopped wondering who kept it clean. Callum exhaled. So where does this leave us? Now we were at the point. I brought up a screen again. This time, a clean breakdown of what it would cost them. A consulting buyout. Licensing transfer. Back-end separation. A full systems audit by a third party. All above board. All necessary if they wanted their operations back under their control. They stared at it like I'd asked for their firstborn. This is Callum began. Reasonable, I finished. Given what I built. Given what you owe. James shook his head. You're charging us for breathing now? No, I said. I'm charging you for the years I let you breathe for free. They fell silent again. We can't afford this right now, Kyle said eventually, his voice soft. Not with the damage control. The vendors. The investors bailing. Then you can't afford to move forward, I replied. Because I'm not handing this over. Not again. You want it, you buy it. Clean. Transparent. Professional. Callum looked defeated. His shoulders sagged. Can we think about this? You've had years to think, I said. You just never imagined you'd have to. James stood abruptly, muttering something about needing air. Kyle looked like he wanted to leave too, but stayed seated out of fear more than loyalty. I ended the screen share. Stopped recording. Then looked each of them dead in the eye. You built your future on something I gave you, I said. And now I'm giving you the chance to own it. But not on my back. Not anymore. The timer read 29:52 when I clicked end meeting. Not a second longer than necessary. I leaned back in my chair and let the quiet settle in. No clapping. No smug satisfaction. Just the steady hum of my laptop fan and the faint echo of three men realizing, for the first time, what it costs to forget the one who wrote the rules. They had never asked who controlled the system. Now they knew. And now, they had to pay. When my wife came home that evening, the tension was already there, clinging to her skin like humidity after a storm. I heard the front door slam with just a little too much force, her heels clicking faster than usual across the hardwood floors. She didn't call out to say she was home. She didn't ask about dinner. Instead, she stormed straight into my office like she had been practicing the confrontation the entire drive. Why is everyone calling me? She snapped, her voice sharp, already cracked with stress. What the hell did you do? I didn't look away from my screen. I just saved the report I was working on, minimized the analytics dashboard for Carver Analytics, and then met her eyes. I exercised my rights, I said calmly. She threw her arms out. Rights? You shut down half my family's businesses. No, I corrected, standing slowly. I stopped supporting them. There's a difference. Her eyes widened in disbelief, as if she couldn't believe I was speaking so plainly, so without shame. You can't just, God, you really think this is okay? James's wedding is days away, and your name is all over group chats and email threads. My mom's freaking out. My dad thinks someone's suing him. What were you thinking? I was thinking, I said slowly, about the moment you told me I wasn't welcome at the wedding. I was thinking about the way you said it like it was a casual favor, like I hadn't built everything that wedding was resting on. That's not fair, she said, voice rising. You're overreacting. You've always been sensitive about this stuff. No, I interrupted, sharper now. Don't do that. Don't call it sensitivity. You told me not to come. You told me they didn't like me. You knew exactly what that meant. You didn't just choose them. You dismissed me. Her mouth opened, then closed. She stepped back like she suddenly realized I wasn't going to apologize. That the quiet man she thought she could scold into submission had already made his move. You're blowing this way out of proportion, she said, arms folding. You could have talked to me, warned me. Anything but this. Now everything's ruined. No, I said again, more firmly. Everything was already broken. You just didn't see it. She scoffed. So this is revenge? This, I said, stepping past her, is clarity. I built their systems, their back end, their apps, their entire digital footprint. And I did it without asking for credit, without making noise. Because I thought I was building something for all of us, not just them. But the moment I was inconvenient, the moment I didn't fit your family's curated image, I was cut out like a mistake in a guest list. She didn't respond right away. Her eyes flicked to the framed photo on the bookshelf, our anniversary in Santorini. Her expression cracked for a moment, softening into something that looked like regret, or maybe fear. They're your family, she whispered. You've known them for years. And that's why I waited, I said, the quiet in my voice colder than shouting would have ever been. That's why I didn't pull the plug the moment they started treating me like background noise. I gave them every chance. I gave you every chance. I didn't know they'd do that, she said, but the words were thin, hollow. You didn't care, I replied. Not enough. She shook her head, walking in a slow circle, arms wrapped around herself now. You can't just destroy everything. They're calling lawyers, IT firms, trying to rebuild. You know they can't afford to replace what you built. Then they should have valued it when it was free, I said. She turned sharply. So what now? You just stand there like you're proud of this. I met her gaze, steady. I'm not proud. I'm not ashamed either. I'm done being used and ignored and labeled as the guy who works in tech like it's some hobby. I'm the reason they've lasted this long. Her phone buzzed again, loud in the quiet of the room. She glanced at it. Her mother. Then again. James. She turned to me. I have to fix this. I didn't stop her. I didn't even nod. She grabbed her coat and bag in a blur, her expression stuck somewhere between panic and disbelief. Before she opened the door, she turned back to look at me, like she was hoping I'd break, offer to undo it all. But I didn't. It's not too late, she said. You can restore it. Give them access again. I shook my head once. The lockout's already begun. It's systemic and legal. They'll have to renegotiate everything. You'll ruin your name, she hissed. Everyone's going to know it was you. I looked at her, finally allowing the truth to settle in my voice. Good. Let them know who I am. She stared at me for another breath, as if trying to find the version of me she used to know. Then she left, and I didn't follow. I watched her car pull out of the driveway, her phone still glued to her ear. I knew where she was going, her sister's house. Back to the nest that had always coddled her. The same people who thought I was invisible. Let her try to fix it. Let them all scramble. Because this wasn't a tantrum. It was the final audit. The calls kept coming. My email stacked with requests, some begging, some threatening, some trying to spin this into a misunderstanding. But I didn't budge. I opened a clean document on my computer and began drafting transition frameworks for them. Not for free, not out of loyalty, but as a consultant, at full market rate, with enforceable contracts. Wasn't their in-law anymore. I was the man they ignored. And now, I was the man they'd have to go through. My wife hadn't packed a bag. She didn't take anything more than her purse. Maybe she thought this was temporary, a freeze that would melt. But some freezes aren't weather. They're boundaries. And this one was permanent. The first headline broke 72 hours later. Tech meltdown halts local VC empire, internal sabotage suspected. I saw it while sipping coffee in my office, the same way I'd watch storm clouds crawl across the sky calmly, with no need to run for cover. The article was vague, speculative, but the tone was clear. Something major had collapsed behind the polished glass doors of Silver Granite Holdings. A cascade failure in several of their portfolio companies. Transactions frozen. Customer portals offline. Data services unrecoverable. No official comment from their PR team. But the leaks had already started. Someone from inside had talked, probably Kyle. Someone always talks when they think it'll spare them the blame. And now the narrative was loose in the world, like a match catching on dry leaves. I didn't panic. I didn't even flinch. Because while they were scrambling to figure out how to restore what I had taken away, I was already 5 steps ahead. Seated inside Carver Analytics HQ, reviewing a full suite of investor-ready projections with Rowena, my legal and strategic lead. The building was modest, intentionally so. But the core? Rock solid. Quiet. Untouched. I'd been preparing for this moment for nearly 3 years, ever since I realized that family was a word my wife's relatives used more like currency than commitment. It had started as a slow itch, a collection of dismissals, the way they always looked past me in conversations, the way I was expected to pick up tabs and patch systems while they praised each other for ambition I knew was rented, not earned. So I built something of my own, not just a backup plan, an empire. Leaner, smarter, silent. Carver Analytics didn't need to make noise to matter. It operated in the sectors no one bragged about: public infrastructure, nonprofit supply chains, digital frameworks for under-resourced clinics and educational centers. Things that worked. Things that mattered. And most importantly, things that no one could steal from me. The fallout came quickly. By day 4, vendors began pulling out of Silver Granite subsidiary contracts. A catering logistics company publicly cited unreliable data support as the reason for cutting ties. Their real estate CRM, once touted as a game-changer, was now being mocked on tech forums for its abrupt implosion. A former employee leaked back-end screenshots showing the failure logs, pointing clearly to revoked system access as the root cause. And that was when the messages changed. The first few emails had been desperate. "Please, can we talk?" Then the bargaining started. "We're willing to discuss compensation for reinstating control." But by the end of the week, the tone had shifted into something else entirely. Blame. Accusation. Threat. James sent a particularly bold message. "You're damaging the entire ecosystem. Don't think this won't have consequences." I didn't respond. Instead, I forwarded it to Rowena, who filed it away under a folder titled Anticipated Hostile Communication. Then I went back to work, reviewing our onboarding flow for a new municipal health database we were building for a regional network of clinics. While they tried to restore their empire, I expanded mine. Journalists started reaching out. Some from blogs, some from real publications. One even left a voicemail saying she just wanted the other side of the story. I didn't take the bait. I had no interest in telling my story through the mouths of people who would twist it into drama. The only public statement I made was a single sentence, issued through Rowena. I exercised my legal rights. Nothing more. No fireworks. No lengthy threads. No expose. Let them argue over morals. I kept the receipts. I watched as speculation spun in every direction. Investors posting vague subtweets, former interns guessing at infrastructure, even a few family members whispering about internal betrayal without knowing what that even meant. But no one could touch me. Not legally. Not technically. Because I hadn't done anything outside the lines. Every clause they ignored. Every licensing term they rushed through. Every digital handshake they never followed up on. It was all binding. All archived. All enforceable. They thought silence was permission. They forgot silence can also be preparation. My wife still hadn't come home. She texted me once, "We need to talk." But I hadn't replied. Not because I didn't have things to say, but because I was done being pulled into conversations that were never meant to include me in the first place. She was with her sister now. I knew that. I also knew they were spinning a new version of the story. One where I had snapped, gone rogue, sabotaged everything because of hurt feelings. I'd seen hints of it already in the comments section of a business op-ed. Some men just can't handle being outshined by their wives' families. I smiled when I read that one, because the truth was, I hadn't been outshined. I'd been the power source the entire time. And now, They were just realizing what darkness felt like. Rowena and I met late that Friday to finalize the transition documentation for 2 new clients. Her expression stayed focused, but I could tell she was impressed. Not just by the work, by the timing, the control, the elegance of the collapse. "You're going to have imitators," she said, closing her tablet. "They'll want to replicate this. The quiet revenge. The clean cut." I shook my head. "This isn't revenge," I said. "It's release." She raised an eyebrow. "You sure?" I paused, considered the word, then nodded. "Yeah, I didn't burn it down. I just stopped holding it up." She leaned back. "Well, that's one way to rebuild." And that was the heart of it. I wasn't just tearing down their castle. I was clearing space for mine, one brick at a time. No lawsuit stuck, no penalties held. Because I never acted out of malice, I acted with precision. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel like a background figure. I didn't feel like the man who was simply tolerated because he was useful. I felt like myself. Unapologetic. Unforgettable. They could spin the story any way they liked. But I had every contract. Every signed clause. Every log entry. And when the noise faded, when the headlines moved on, when the weddings and lawsuits and gossip died out, my system would still be running. Still clean. Still mine. The wedding was canceled. No formal announcement. No press release. Just whispers that spread through social circles like cigarette smoke. Unwelcome, lingering, staining everything. One by one, vendors dropped out. First the catering company, citing logistical concerns. Then the event planner, who posted a vague Instagram story about clients who treat contractors like magic genies. Even the florist backed out, offering refunds and redirecting the pre-ordered blooms to local funeral homes. Somewhere, someone tried to save face. But it was too late. Callum's empire was bleeding from too many arteries to patch. Without functioning systems, the bakery chain couldn't accept digital payments, and customers weren't waiting in line for cash registers like it was 1998. The CRM software was beyond salvaging agents jumping ship to competitors while their entire client base evaporated. The boutique fitness app? Gone. Uninstalled in thousands of frustrated taps. Their family's credibility, once a glossy showroom of smiling photos and quarterly success stories, had cracked open under scrutiny. And inside, it was hollow. The wedding that was supposed to be the year's highlight, a union of money, power, and curated Instagram perfection, disappeared from the calendar. Venues were quietly notified. Custom favors, canceled. Gowns and suits hung limply in closets, untouched. No live stream. No champagne toasts. No picture-perfect reels with choreographed entrances. Just an empty Saturday and a pile of unclaimed RSVPs. My wife didn't tell me it was off. I found out through silence. She'd moved in with her sister the week before, packing only what she could grab in one trip. No bags. Just her purse, her charger, a few clothes. As if she thought this would blow over in a few days. It didn't. She hadn't reached out since her single vague text. "We need to talk." But there was nothing left to say. The locks hadn't changed, but the house no longer held space for her. Not after everything. She wanted to be gone. Now I was. And so was her family's future. I stared out the living room window that morning, the one that overlooked the backyard where we used to sit with wine and talk about what we'd built. I remembered the night I suggested helping James get his startup off the ground. How excited she was, how she kissed my cheek and called me the best thing that ever happened to this family. I was their best thing, until they didn't need me anymore. It was strange, watching something collapse from the outside. All these years, I'd been the scaffolding. The tech guy, the dependable problem solver. The man in the corner with a laptop and a quiet smile. And now, with one step back, the whole structure swayed. Not from force, from neglect. And when I let go, it didn't just fall. It folded. I sent her one final message. No drama. No bitterness. Just clarity. You want to be gone. Now I am. But so is your family's future. There was no reply. I didn't expect one. I didn't wait. Instead, I focused on Carver Analytics. The company I'd nurtured quietly while they played spotlight games with inflated valuations and self-congratulatory articles. Carver was different. It wasn't built to impress dinner guests. It was built to solve real problems. I met with Rowena the next day. We sat across from each other at the long glass table in the conference room I'd recently expanded, paid for, in part, by funds I no longer needed to pour into other people's dreams. Clean break, she said, sliding over a file. Legal fallout's wrapping up. They tried to bluff a suit, but we've got every clause covered. They signed everything. Multiple times. Not a single document out of order. Any settlement offers? I asked, already knowing the answer. She gave a tight smile. They can't afford one. We didn't laugh. It wasn't funny. It was just true. James's in-laws, the power players who once whispered to each other across yacht decks and gala stages, were now knee-deep in operational collapse. Their liquidity dried up in weeks. The media backlash only compounded the damage. Investors ghosted them. Partners refused meetings. Their foundation was tech, and I had always been the quiet ghost inside the code. Now the ghost was gone, and the house had no bones. Rowena helped me untangle the final contracts, clean the financial seams. Every exit was precise. No blow-ups. No litigation. Not one asset lost. Not one law broken. I had done what they never thought I would. I walked away clean. Back at home, I removed the last framed photo from the wall. A picture of me and her family at the first bakery opening, all grins and champagne. I slid it out of the frame and tucked it into a drawer. Not out of sentimentality, just for the record. The story wasn't erasure. It was a footnote. Later that night, I walked through the quiet of the house. No ambient laughter. No footsteps upstairs. Just the hum of the fridge and the occasional creak of settling wood. The silence didn't feel empty. It felt earned. I made a drink, sat on the back porch, looked up at the stars. Sometimes I thought about what might have happened if they'd just said thank you. If they'd remembered who built the foundation beneath them. If my wife had simply stood up for me instead of apologizing for me. But then I remembered, this wasn't about revenge. It was about alignment. They showed me where I stood. I adjusted accordingly. And while their future was crumbling, mine was just beginning. Rowena had already lined up 2 new partnerships. Organizations that actually read their contracts, who respected infrastructure, who paid invoices on time and treated back-end engineers like architects, not housekeepers. Carver was growing. My calendar, once filled with favors and unpaid strategy calls, now held real meetings, real stakes, real value. And best of all, I owned it. Completely. No silent partners. No in-laws breathing down my neck. No curated photo shoots for validation. Just the work. And my name on every blueprint. The wedding didn't happen. The house of cards fell. But I was still standing. And I wasn't going back. 6 months later, my name was on the door. Carver and Stone Consulting. In clean, silver lettering on matte black glass. Subtle. Intentional. The kind of sign you notice if you're looking, but doesn't scream for attention. Just like I preferred it. The office sat on the 2nd floor of a modest brick building in the business district. Nothing flashy. Just efficient. Accessible. Ours. I unlocked the door every morning with a kind of reverence, a quiet awareness that this was the life I had built. Not given, not borrowed, but earned. Inside, the space buzzed with a kind of energy I hadn't felt in years. Not the manic, superficial urgency of startups trying to go viral. Not the fragile optimism of family-run ventures held together by charm and arrogance. This was deeper, grounded, purposeful. I hired young developers, sharp, hungry, often overlooked. The kind who'd been told they didn't fit the mold. Who coded through lunch breaks and sketched UI ideas on the backs of receipts. They reminded me of me before I started patching systems for people who saw me as a tool rather than a partner. We didn't build for billionaires. We built for the people billionaires forget. Nonprofits, inner-city clinics, educational organizations, groups that didn't need noise, they needed solutions. Systems that didn't crash under pressure. Platforms that made their jobs easier instead of showing off. We'd recently finished an analytics suite for a network of local food banks. The director hugged me the day we deployed the live dashboard, told me it saved them over 3 hours a day and helped feed nearly 200 more families each week. No press, no bonuses, just that hug and the quiet knowledge that something I built mattered. It was enough. At the back of the office, above my desk, hung a framed pen. Sleek, silver, unassuming. The one I used to sign the original licensing agreements with Callum Weston and his team. The pen that had once handed them everything. And later reminded them who'd owned it all along. Beneath the frame, I had engraved a simple line. Never forget what they erased. It wasn't a warning. Not anymore. It was a reminder, for me, for the ones I mentored, that silence doesn't mean absence. That being quiet doesn't mean being weak. That just because they don't see you doesn't mean you're not holding the foundation together. Some days, I'd sit alone in the office after everyone left, staring at that pen, hearing echoes of words I once let define me. Forgettable, not welcome, just the tech guy, not anymore. Rowena stopped by every other week. We built more than a business relationship. Trust, mostly. The kind born not from convenience but battle. She never once doubted me during the fallout. She saw the long game even when things got messy. When I wanted to torch it all, she reminded me. Let it collapse on its own. Your silence will speak louder than any fire. And she was right. We never got sued. Not once. Every attempt fizzled in paperwork. Every threat dissolved in contracts they hadn't read. That's what happens when you build carefully, methodically, with precision, not spite. My ex-wife never came back. She didn't need to. I heard through a mutual friend that she was staying with her sister long-term, trying to find work, trying to distance herself from the Weston name without admitting she'd ever benefited from it. There were whispers that she'd filed for a quiet separation. I didn't contest it. I didn't even open the email she sent when she wanted to revisit the terms of our marriage. We didn't have terms anymore. She'd made her choice when she aligned with those who erased me, when she laughed along as they brushed me off, when she chose silence in rooms where I should have been defended. And I'd made mine, not through confrontation, not through revenge, through rebuilding, through walking forward without glancing back. One day, a delivery came. No sender listed, just a package at our office door. Inside was a framed photo one I hadn't seen in years. Me, James, and Callum at the first bakery opening. I was in the middle, holding the ribbon scissors. Someone had drawn a thick red X over my face. I didn't get angry. I didn't even flinch. I carried the frame to the break room, tossed it into the trash, and walked back to my desk. Sometimes, people don't just forget you. They need to unremember you. Because remembering means accountability. And some people would rather rewrite history than admit they edited you out of it. I let them, because my version didn't need their approval. My story didn't need their signatures anymore. It had mine. We got a new client the following Monday. A nonprofit focused on helping veterans reintegrate through job placement. Their backend was a mess. Outdated servers, broken interfaces, insecure endpoints. I looked at the scope and felt a familiar flicker of satisfaction. Another rebuild. Another chance to make something stable, quiet, lasting. I assigned it to 2 junior devs on my team. Watched them light up at the opportunity. Watched them step into the space I once had to fight to occupy. That was the real win. It wasn't collapsing their empire. It was building one where no one had to beg for acknowledgement, where credit wasn't stolen, where value was seen. As the sun dipped below the skyline, casting warm orange across the glass panels of the office, I closed my laptop and stood. Sometimes revenge isn't loud. It's a keystroke, a quiet exit, a new door with your name on it, and the peace that comes with never, ever asking for permission again.